Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. I've gotten a few requests lately to paint some more Tyranids for the channel, and one viewer asked me about Hive Fleet Tiamet. I thought it was a really interesting color scheme, so I decided to make a video about it. So grab your brushes and let's go! After assembling the model, I primed it with a light gray, followed by a spray of white from the top and sides. The result is a light, zenithal style undercoat with white on the top sides, blending to gray underneath. You could just as easily spray your model with solid white and get great results too. For the first layer, I made a mix of Apothecary white and Russ gray, about a 4-to-1 mix. I wanted something a little darker than Apothecary white on its own, and mixing in some opaque gray brought the color exactly where I want it. Just like any contrast paint, work on one section at a time and apply plenty of paint, making sure it flows into all the recesses. Then use the brush to soak up any excess. On the more prominent raised edges, I like to wipe away some of the paint, which effectively creates a highlight. Just rinse the brush, wipe it on a paper towel, and then wipe away as much of the paint as you like. Work all the way around the model, painting over everything except the claws. Those will get coated with an opaque paint later. With that layer dry, I want to create some subtle color shifts on the skin. I began with Aethermatic blue mixed with an equal amount of contrast medium, and painted a thin glaze where the skin meets the scales and at the end of each appendage. Blending contrast paint is easy. Just paint one section at a time, then rinse the brush, wipe it on a paper towel, and then use the clean brush to soften the edge. I find that a larger brush with a blunt tip works better for this kind of blending work. This is a number 2 brush that I'm using here. With the subtle blue color dry, I went back to a fine-tipped brush and painted some undiluted Aethermatic blue in the cracks and joints. For the scales, I'll be mixing a dark green paint with 2 parts black Templar and 1 part Aeldari emerald. A lot of painters shy away from mixing paint, but I'd really encourage you to try. Mixing your own colors is an easy way to personalize your army, and if you mix up a whole bottle of paint, you'll only have to mix it once. Check out this video here to see how to mix your own custom color. I think the color looks great after just one layer, and you could stop here if you like. But I want to make the model look closer to the studio version, so I'm going to apply a second layer. I want to build up some depth on the skin, so I took some of the dark green mix and diluted it with a lot of contrast medium, about 6-to-1. Just like with the blue stage earlier, I painted the mix on one section at a time, then rinsed the brush, wiped it on a paper towel, and then softened the edge. If you're fast enough, you can work on a couple sections at a time. Don't worry about getting any paint on the claws, they'll be getting an opaque base coat later. After this layer dries, you could apply some more, depending on how deep you want the shading to be. Next, I painted the gun with Magos purple. Now is a great time to ask you to do those YouTube things we all love so much. If you're liking the video so far, please click the like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe as well so you don't miss out on any future content. Then I painted the eyes and gun details with Sigvald Burgundy. I shaded the teeth with Nuln Oil, taking my time and trying to be as neat as possible. The claws are going to be black, but I want them to stand out from the scales on his back, and a warm undertone will help set them apart. I began by painting the claws and the gun scales with Stormvermin fur. This is a fairly weak color, so I'd recommend painting a second layer for an even finish. After the claws dried, I painted them with a layer of black Templar. The Stormvermin fur base coat shows through a little bit and helps make the black appear warmer. At this stage you could base the model and call it finished, but instead we'll move on and add a few highlights. First up are the dark green scales. I want to keep these really dark, and I'll begin with a thin glaze highlight of Sons of Horus green. I'm focusing on most of the edges and a few streaks along each scale. This first highlight is intended to even out the surface, more so than lightening the edges. Contrast paints can sometimes leave an uneven finish, depending on how they break and flow on the surface textures, and you may notice some of the edges are a little uneven. There are some vibrant green spots, some really light green spots, and some dull spots. This first highlight is toning those all down to something more even and manageable, and it will provide a better foundation for the next highlight. For the next highlight, I'm using some slightly thinned Fenrisian gray. This highlight is a lot more striking than the last, and because this gray is a very big step up in value, it's important to make the highlights small and narrow. I want the scales to stay pretty dark, so I'm restricting the highlights to prominent corners and edges. Next, I highlighted the skin and teeth with white. I'm not too worried about highlighting the lower portions of the limbs, especially on tons of troops. I think a few select highlights on the top half of the model will do just fine. On some areas, like the rounded shoulders, I like to thin the white paint with water and apply a softer glaze highlight, and any areas with a clearly defined edge will get a sharp line highlight. I want to reinforce the warm tones on the claws, so I highlighted the edges with Stormvermin fur. Then I picked out the edges of the claws with Bonewhite. Just like with the green scales, this highlight is a pretty big step up in value, so make sure the highlights are small and narrow. Use the sharpest brush you have, and try rolling your brush as you drag it along your palette to help form a sharp point. Next I picked out the eyes and gun details with Fire Dragon. I highlighted the detail in the center of the gun in 2 stages. First I applied a thin glaze of Fire Dragon in the center, and then I painted a highlight of undiluted Fire Dragon along the outside. I mixed white with a small amount of pink to highlight the edges of the gun. If you make any mistakes on the skin, a mix of Grey Seer and Sons of Horus green makes a really close match. Use pure Grey Seer near the top of the limbs, and add more green as you go further down. I used an old brush to apply a generous layer of textured paint to the base, and while the paint was still wet, I sprinkled on some coarse gravel and fine sand. After that dried, I painted over the whole base with thinned Rhinox hide. Then I dry brushed the base with Steel Legion Drab. I painted the rocks with Dawnstone, shaded them with Nuln Oil, and then painted the edge of the base with Rhinox hide. I mixed a paste of white glue and snow flock and used a sculpting tool to apply some patches to the base, then dipped the whole base in the tub of flock while the snow was still wet. I really enjoy painting Tyranids, and this color scheme was a nice change of pace from my Hive Fleet Kraken army. Do you have a favorite Hive Fleet you'd like to see on the channel? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. And until next time, happy painting.